Hey guys, so we're just over at Cambridge University. We're given a talk on hoof anatomy, function and balance for the Cambridge Equine Veterinary Society. So we're just getting set up now, ready for it.
Yeah, okay. Right, I think we'll make a start. Firstly, thank you so much for coming. We've got Alex Ridgeway here to talk a little bit about the ins and outs of equine feet, which we obviously only get a little bit of teaching on in preclinical, and it's quite a big part of equine lameness. We'd just like to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, Red Horse Products, who have very kindly supplied a variety of antibacterial, antifungal agents, some honey-based skin cream, hoof hardeners, and sprays. So they've also provided our refreshments for the evening. So I'd like to welcome Alex, who will tell us a little bit more about what he does. So just join me in welcoming.
Hi guys, my name is Alex, like Kirsty just introduced. How do I do it?
Oh, you just have to press it.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to give a talk on hoof anatomy, balance and foot function. It won't go on for too long. We'll go over a few slides. And then if you've got some questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you want to come down, we'll do a bit of a hands-on Q&A with some of these specimens I brought with me today. Yeah, so as I said, my name's Alex. I qualified back in 2015, and I did got my diploma from the worshipful company of Farriers, and I did a 5-year apprenticeship in Norfolk. And while I was there, we predominantly shod leisure horses. We did some nice endurance horses. We also did sort of show jumpers and eventers, but the majority of it was leisure horses. And then we took an opportunity to move to Newmarket, and I'm now starting my 3rd season working in Newmarket. We predominantly work with the thoroughbred racehorses. We also do broodmares and foals. We recently opened up a forge facility just on the outskirts of Newmarket. I was talking to Kirsty before a little bit about it, and it's somewhere that we thought we wanted to create a place where people can bring horses. We can do full horse assessments, slow motion videography, bespoke shoeing. Handmade shoes, some fabrication. You can see some of the jobs we've done over on the right hand side here. And we also offer a service of 3D modelling. And if you just take a look at some of these specimens here, you can come down and have a little look at them a little later on. We're able to basically make a full 3D cast of feet, and we use them as we use these for reference points, so we can cast a foot. Come up with a shoeing plan. This is a laminatic horse. This is a wooden clog. We've got dental impression material around the back, and we can highlight what we're going to aim to achieve. Our shoeing plan for that horse, and then sort of later down the line we can take another cast of it and see if we've been able to achieve what we wanted to achieve. So that's the forge. We're also going to be putting on some clinics. We're going to create an environment where we can teach other farriers, but also invite vets there, whether it be vet students or qualified vets, to come along, and we'll go over some of these things and some of the things we're going to talk about today. I'm also working towards my my degree, my bachelor's over at the University of Central Lancashire, and in partnership with Mysco College. I'm in the 1st year of that. So that's another 4 years on top of the 4 years that we've already done. So yes, there's plenty of work to be done on that yet. But I also create, and as you can probably tell from here, YouTube videos. The aim is to sort of share some of this information, showcase what we actually do as farriers and the level of science behind it, and just promote farriery in that sense, and encourage others to take up the profession. And if they want to come on board, we'll sort of have the facilities to sort of accommodate for that. So that's who I am. So the talk I want to give today is on anatomy, balance and foot function. There's a few things here, there's a few statements I just want to read off to just highlight the importance of this. The hoof has a wide range of functions that are often working together simultaneously to form the overall hoof mechanism. When these functions become compromised, it is the role of the farrier or the veterinarian to have the knowledge and understanding of the consequences on the internal anatomical structures in order to prevent or delay the onset of hoof pathologies or even failures. These changes often become apparent through changes in hoof morphology as the redistribution of forces about the hoof take place. Mark Caldwell stated that the form of the bearing border of the hoof is a mirror image of the stress placed upon it. 70% of lamenesses can be directly attributed to the front feet, and examples of hoof disorders induced by loss of structural integrity, biomechanical efficiency, are here. Palmar hoof pain, navicular, coffin joint arthritis, uni and bilateral side bone, suspensory desmitis, sheared heels, and laminitis. So what we're going to look at, we're not going to look at the overall hoof anatomy. We're going to focus more on the epidermal structures, horn composition and cellular makeup, horn growth and its associated anatomy, and then we're going to go over the hoof mechanism and its ability to function under load, and the balance and understanding of geometric proportions. Okay. Excuse me for coughing, I was just getting over the man flu, and that's been quite bad. Okay, so material known as horn covering the end of the digit, which is a continuation of the outer layer of skin, or the epidermis. I have an old hoof that was buried for 2 years that is here. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be, the key structures are the corium, I know that's the dermis structures, but hoof wall, horny sole, bars, frog, and the white line. I'm assuming everybody knows what all those structures are. No blood vessels or nerves are in the epidermis. Cells of the germinative layer receive nutrients from the diffusion from the corium. Epidermal structures of the hoof are extremely strong and resilient, whilst also maintaining a level of elasticity. I'll go into a little bit later on, but this is again another style of cast. This is dental impression material, but it acts very similar to horn. And when you actually push on it, you can see we have a level of elasticity in this, and we'll talk a little bit later on about elasticity and plastic deformation. That's one of the reasons why we then get hoof failure like this one here. So they are capable of absorbing and distributing weight-bearing forces, and they do this by transferring the descending body weight across the laminal interface into a tensile force towards the outer hoof wall, which is designed to be more of a compressive, or more designed to absorb the compressive forces of the weight-bearing skeleton above. So the problems or the pathologies that arise when the elastic potential of this epidermal structure fail. Sorry, I read that wrong. Problems and pathologies arise when elastic potential of these epidermal structures are exceeded and start to fail. Okay, so the coriums that I mentioned before, there's 5 of them. We'll go around the foot. We have the Perioplic corium, coronary corium, laminal corium, sole corium, and the frog corium. So each epidermal region is associated with the dermal region, the corresponding dermal region. I think this is a great picture. I imagine it's by Christopher von Hurst, showing the sort of dermal tissue that you can see there. Okay, so the Perioplic corium lies in the Perioplic groove, and that sits on the upper edge of the coronary corium. It produces the soft horn known as the periopal, and it's a continuation of the skin, and it has these short hair-like papillary projections, and it blends with the corium of the frog at the back of the foot. Just trying to see if there's any on here. So basically it comes around the coronary band here, and it forms here as it blends with the corium of the frog. So, I'm just trying to think whether I actually go into more detail on the Perioplic Corium or not. I don't think I do. Yeah, I do actually. I'll go into it. Okay, so the coronary corium, this is the most important one because it's where we produce the hoof wall. The coronary corium lies in the coronary cushion, lines the coronary cushion and sits in the coronary groove. You can see that on the picture here, this sort of half-round structure at the top of the hoof wall. And it's thicker at the toe and thins out as it travels towards the heels. The laminal corium, well, it's the dermal or sensitive laminae. Primary and secondary, the primary being 5 to 600, secondary 1 to 200. This is a great picture that shows that. It's attached to the dorsal hoof wall via the modified periosteum, but it's also attached to the collateral cartilages as you go round towards the back of the foot via the subcutaneous tissue. It has terminal papillae along here, which are responsible for secreting the white line. And it's one of the things we look at when we go a little bit later on when we go into foot mapping. And the white line is an indication of the pedal bone, or especially the inner border of the white line is a true representation of the pedal bone. Okay, so the hoof wall. The hoof wall grows at an even rate from toe to heels. The thickness varies and often thicker at the toe than at the heels. Growth rate is highly dependable upon the individual horse and affected by multiple factors: environment, breed type, conformation, workload, nutrition, etc. The mature horse, on average, is around about 9 to 12 months from top to bottom at the toe, top to bottom, and then at the heels 4 to 6. That does vary with age, and as younger horses or even foals do have a much quicker growth rate, and I think it's actually been proven that it's nearly twice as fast for a young horse. I think it's up to the age of 2. And then as the horse ages, as it gets older, that growth rate will reduce as well, much slower. So we take a closer look at the hoof wall. The hoof wall is the visible part that covers the front and sides and turns towards the heels to form the bars. It's made up of 3 layers: stratum externum, stratum medium, and stratum internum. Commonly we see a 3:1 heel to toe ratio. It's produced from the corium that lines the coronary cushion and sits in the coronary groove. And the coronary corium has these hair-like papillae projections, similar to that of the perioplic corium, and it's responsible for the production of the stratum medium. Stratum medium being the bulk of the hoof wall. Stratum internum is our laminal interface. Stratum externum would be the periople. So if we take a little bit of a closer look at the stratum internum, it's the laminal interface between the dermal and epidermal tissue. And that picture before where we see with the hoof, you can see these sort of leaf or curtain-like structures. This is sort of that, a little bit more zoomed in, shall I say. So it's made up of 5 to 600 primary epidermal laminae, each containing the 1 to 200 secondary. The secondary epidermal laminae dovetail with the adjacent secondary dermal laminae, and this covers the parietal surface of P3. The actual pedal bone is suspended within inside the hoof capsule. The horse doesn't actually stand on, I use this and this mould here, so the horse doesn't actually stand on its pedal bone. So you have this full suspension all the way around. It's one of the reasons why, in the case of laminitis, being the breakdown of that laminal interface, and you can see why then you'd get founder cases where you've got displacement of the pedal bone, or even sinking cases. And it's believed that the bond between the two dermal and epidermal laminae act as a ratchet mechanism, and it's chemicals within the basement membrane that allow the wall, or tell the wall, to detach, displace distally, and reattach. And this is continually happening around the entire hoof wall. If you think, the horse's body weight being suspended within this hoof capsule, yet this hoof capsule is still able to grow down. It's quite a phenomenal sort of structure. Okay, so the stratum medium. So the bulk of the hoof wall, it's produced at the corium. It's produced by the corium region, as we discussed. And there are three types of horn: tubular horn, intertubular horn, and intratubular horn. And again, these pictures on the side here show these hair-like papillae projections. Corium has many hair-like papillae projections responsible for this. And as you can see here, this is your your tubular horn, and then the space that fills between these tubular horn is known as our intertubular horn, or your cement that holds it all together. The third type is the intratubular horn, and that basically conveys the moisture, and it's found within inside each horn tubule. Okay, so the coronary corium is responsible for hoof growth, as we just discussed. Three types. Tubular horn, they run the entire hoof wall, so from the coronary border to the bearing border. They're orientated to absorb compressive forces. Intertubular horn is secreted by the germinative layer in between these papillae, and it's at right angles to the horn, the tubular horn. And as I said, the intratubular horn is secreted from the tips of these papillae. And you can see here it's under no compression, and it conveys the moisture. You can see how the tubular horn is the cellular sort of matrix of the tubular horn is orientated in a longitudinal direction, and the difference between the tubular horn and intertubular horn, which is more of again, it's at right angle, so it's a horizontal orientation, and I'll explain a little bit more why that is key to how the horn actually withstands these forces. Brings me to this slide. So how does it all work? Well, basically what's happening is we're having a cell mitosis on this germinative layer or basement membrane, where we get, I think it's sort of 6 or 7 generations of cells that then become, detached from this basal layer. And depending on where they're actually produced along here, whether they be at the sides of the papillae, the tip, or in between, dictates what type of horn they're actually going to be. Once they detach from that membrane, they undergo keratinization, where they begin to sort of take in proteins, keratin. They start to break down, they lose their nucleus, they eventually lose their cytoplasm, and they go through the process of apoptosis. And as they migrate, as this is continually happening, this cell production is displacing them further and further away from that basal layer, and they undergo more and more compressive forces to the point where they're pretty much, this picture doesn't show it, but you've lost all the nucleus, they're sort of broken down, the desmosomes, they're sort of just a compact keratinized structure. Again, this is another picture that highlights what's going on in this sort of coronary band region, how the horn is produced, and it's actually quite a good picture because it shows how the density changes of this stratum medium. So we have a lot of more pigmentation to this side, less pigmentation. You can actually see the individual horn tubules, and what that basically is this one's wrong. So the horn tubules, as I explained before, are very good at absorbing compressive forces or withstanding compressive forces. The intertubular horn, I said, is arranged in this horizontal orientation, and it's very good at tensile forces. And if we go back to how we explained, when you have the descending body weight, coming down onto the hoof, this pedal bone is suspended within this hoof capsule, so there needs to be a transfer of this weight to the hoof wall, and it does that through the tensile forces across the laminal bed. Tension in this now. So the more intertubular horn being has a higher ability to cope with these tensile forces that are coming across this laminal interchange here, transferring the force across to the compressive horn tubules that then take the load. And then that brings us to the stratum externum, which was the periopal. So it's the outermost layer of horn. Its main role is to form the flexible junction between the hard horn and the soft skin. It protects against infection. It's responsible for the transfer of moisture from the outside of the hoof up into the coronary cushion and providing the moisture content to the stratum medium. And as I said before, that intertubular horn that's produced from the tips of the papillae. And due to the environmental conditions or even hoof care intervention, the periopal is often worn away or rasped away. And you only really tend to see the periopal on a sort of wet foot because it is only a sort of a few cells thick, tends to wear away, especially in sort of sandy or some muddy environments. And some people would say, going back to some of these products, that putting on sort of hoof conditioner is not very good because the hoof wall is impermeable, which it is. But what you're actually doing by applying these hoof conditioners, not hoof oil, you're actually protecting that periopal and allowing that periopal to function by absorbing that moisture, taking it up into the coronary band, and then replenishing the foot that way, rather than actually absorbing it through the wall. Okay, so the horny sole, it's produced similar to that of the hoof wall. The papillae of the sole corium are around 45 degrees, so they're not sort of longitudinally orientated like the hoof wall. And they form this mesh formation, or this crisscrossing layers of horn. It has a much higher moisture content than the hoof wall does, around about 32%, rather than the wall has a moisture content of only 25%. And it also has an ability to exfoliate. But the main function of it is to flatten under load and then return. So hence this sort of mesh makeup, it allows it to do that. So it's flexing under load, but it's also protecting the basal aspect of the foot. It should have a degree of concavity to it. So you can see here we've got this concavity in here, and again in this one here. Yet some horses don't have that concavity, and they're horses that would be more prone to solar bruising or even inflammation of the sort of solar aspect of the pedal bone. And they should match or should correspond to the arc of P3. If you look at our navicular bone here, we can see this sort of concave surface. The bars are a continuation of the hoof wall as it moves inwards at the heel buttress. The bars and the hoof wall create an area known as the seat of corn, and it's a landmark often used to refer to the location of the palmar processes of P3, here and here. These are our areas that we're referring to. They offer strength and stability to the hoof capsule, aiding in its mechanical expansion and return under load, and form part of the healthy heel mechanism. They also create a larger bearing surface of the foot, therefore reducing the pressure per square inch the horn is actually under. Okay, so foot function. The hoof performs multiple functions and is often doing so simultaneously. Personally, I use an anagram SPANK to highlight them, and that is support, protection, anti-concussion, non-slip, and circulatory. Support, the descending body weight of the skeletal frame, muscles, and organs. Protection of the internal structures, coffin joint, navicular apparatus, bursa, tendon attachments. Anti-concussion in the absorbing and the dispersing of shock. The grip, preventing slip and actually providing traction. And the hydrostatic function and the return of blood to the heart. Whilst doing so, it is continuously distributing forces And the three forces involved are stress, strain, and torsion. Stress being the compressive force, strain the tensile force, and torsion the shear force. Often with a horse with medial lateral imbalances or prolonged medial lateral imbalance, you'll lose the structural integrity to the back half of the foot. The internal structures then lose this elastic properties. They develop this plastic deformation, and you actually get independent movement of the heels. You can actually manipulate the foot similar to what I'm doing here now, and that is something we refer to as sheared heels. And again, that would be the torsion of the foot is under strain due to that medial lateral imbalance. Horn and associated soft tissues have this elastic potential. This allows a large degree of deformation whilst returning to the original shape and form. And if you think of a horse at gallop, with it being a 3-beat gait, the horse will be loading one limb at one point, and it can withstand 2.5 times its own body weight on that one foot. So it's certainly capable of dealing with high amounts of stress. So if we look a little bit at the hoof mechanism, so what is a hoof mechanism? Well, it's when all the anatomical structures within the foot work in harmony for the overall biomechanical functionality. And if I'll just explain this drawing a little bit. So this is the depression theory. Basically, the descending body weight is coming down the leg, and we get a backward rotation of P2, which forces the foot. This is where my leg doesn't work. Yeah, so yes, we get this descending body weight. You get sort of backward rotation of P2, forcing the back half of the foot into the ground. That's met by an opposing ground reaction force underneath. Two opposing forces. The soft tissues then have to disperse to either side. As the digital cushion is directly below the P2, we have it pushing out to the side. We're pushing the collateral cartilages out with it, flattening the sole and widening the heels at the back. However, once that load surpasses the elastic potential of the horn and even those soft tissues, we reach what is referred to as plastic deformation. And the definition of plastic deformation is a change in shape of a solid body without fracture under an action of a sustained load. This is a stress strain graph, and this is clearly showing the elastic region, which healthy horn can withstand. But obviously we reach this plastic region where we'll no longer return to its original shape, and we start to see hoof morphology. These are two great examples of that. So these feet have completely lost any sort of elasticity. I suppose you could probably even say we've reached fracture point, but we're definitely in the plastic region here. We're not going to be getting this back anytime soon. Very difficult to shoe in that situation. Not the nicest. Okay, so foot balance. So what exactly is foot balance? Foot balance is the relationship with, the relationship of the hoof interface with the skeleton and the ground-bearing surface. Not to be mistaken with level. It's very easy to, or whether it be a farrier or anybody, to look down the long axis of the limb, see that the foot is level and assume it is also balanced. That is incorrect. Balance has to be considered in all three axes, and that's X, Y, and Z. But when we do approach a horse, universal sole thickness, symmetry, hoof past an axis, foot flight, foot fall, and loading, the bottom two being more of a dynamic assessment. But we're basically, when we talk about hoof past an axis, we're looking for a correlation between the hoof past an axis and the shoulder axis. So we're taking in the overall horse's conformation rather than just looking at the feet alone. I was quite lucky. Recently I got to spend a little bit of time with Dr. Mark Caldwell, recently done his PhD. He's also a fellow of the worshipful company of Farriers, so he must have the highest credentials you can possibly have. And his thesis was on hoof balance metrics and their association with biomechanics and pathologies of the equine digit. What Mark was able to do, he was able to consider all the various trimming practices, which he believed there was plenty out there, and they were well studied and well documented. However, there was no standardized shoeing protocol, or trimming protocol should I say, and that's what he was able to do. He did that in order, whether it be Mark trimming it, me trimming it, or whoever, it would be a repeatable process, and you should be able to yield the same results. So, so any studies that are now done, or any research that's undertaken, if we have a standardized trimming protocol, it should then be able to be repeated over and over again. He also came up with the foot mapping technique, and foot mapping is a way of using the external landmarks or reference points to determine the internal anatomical structures, and he was also able to come up with a generalized, as a guideline, geometric proportions of the hoof as guidelines to assist our trim. We'll go into that now. So as I said, he used the external landmarks to determine what was actually happening inside, and that was basically able to map and locate the center of rotation of the coffin joint. And this line that I've put on this hoof right here is I've used the external hoof to actually locate that point, and it's when we locate the center of rotation that we can actually trim the foot about that sort of axis in order to achieve the most biomechanical efficiency of the foot. He was also able to locate P3 and its mechanical advantages for breakover. And in this diagram here, you can see how we've mapped this foot, and he's put on the tip of the pedal bone. So without taking any x-rays, using his trimming or his mapping protocol, you were able to, not exactly, but you're able to sort of get an idea of where that pedal bone is. You're also able to symmetry in both the medial and lateral aspects about the central axis of the frog. You're able to correlate the dorsal hoof wall length using calipers, and how that then related to Duckett's dot, or also known as the center of pressure, often 3/8 of an inch back from the apex of the frog, our center of pressure. And by taking this dorsal hoof wall length, you can take from Duckett's dot back to the widest part of the frog, and it also correlates the tip, or where the tip of the toe should be, to actual center of rotation. And the final, he's also able to, I don't have it on here, but from the widest part of the foot to the termination of the contralateral bar, as we mentioned before, these are the bars here. So from here to the widest part of the foot should also match that proportional length as well, so the dorsal hoof wall. So he's taken this measurement to sort of create this idealistic foot that fits within here. So when we actually go to a foot and we can see that this foot is not fitting into these sort of geometric proportions, we know something's going on. We've got some sort of hoof morphology that needs to be addressed. And again, I don't have it on here, but I have it on another slide. The dorsal hoof wall to heel height ratio across all horses that he studied was around about 3:1. We did use a contour gauge, and basically what we did with the contour gauge on the top here, we were able to apply it to the coronary band region, and once we'd had the gauge set, we were then able to take it to the toe, map around the toe, and we could see any sort of flares in the hoof wall, as the coronary band is a direct correlation to the pedal bone underneath it. So we're also able to use the bearing border perpendicular to the long axis, as I explained before. We're assessing down the long axis. of the leg, and also the hoof pastern axis should correlate with the axis of the shoulder. Okay, so this is a horse that we did. So this is an example of incorrect hoof balance. So hoof balance is a direct effect on the forces experienced by the lower limb. For example, your heel to toe height ratio, usually around 3:1, when compromised, and you have this long toe, low heel conformation, it puts a direct impact upon the DDFT and consequently the navicular apparatus. It's also been stated that for 1 degree in change in angulation of the pedal bone results in a 4% increase in strain on the DDFT. And if you probably took a measurement here, will be a long way off, just 1 degree for sure. Horses are well adept at adjusting their posture in order to compensate for hoof balance. However, there is also evidence of an increased likelihood that a specific hoof shape relating to the instance of specific pathologies. So if we take a look at here, we can see how the posture, the horse has adapted its own stance, slightly leaning forward or sort of standing in front of itself. We've lost the hoof pastern axis of this foot here. We can see a much more broken back hoof pastern axis. We've got that long toe, the forward migrating foot. We don't have the long toe low heels situation because he has actually grown a fair bit of heel, but we do have that forward migration, and we can see that postural adaptation going on with this central line drawn on here. So what basically the horse is doing, he is experiencing pressure in the back of the foot here because of this long toe leverage, causing sort of backward rotation, crushing that area, putting a lot of pressure here. So the horse will adopt this posture, pulling up, putting tension on the deep digital flexor tendon to try and lift him up out of those heels, hence the stance. So therefore you're putting extra strain on the tendon, which then has negative consequences to the navicular region, the navicular bursa, and the whole apparatus. So what our aim is to restore the orientation of the hoof in relation to the limb. And it didn't actually take a lot of trimming on this horse, although he did have a little bit of foot to come off, not quite as much as you'd think. But the main thing was reducing that toe leverage, and you can see how his posture has completely changed. So basically we were restoring the geometric proportions whilst maintaining strength and compensating for this conformational load. I actually think we left this horse barefoot, but you can certainly shoe this horse a lot better than what he has been here. You can give him support on the back of that foot there, but you can see how his hoof pastern axis has been restored. But the most interesting thing to me is how the horse actually manages these poor hoof morphology or poor foot balance. You can see how he'll just sort of change his way of standing. This horse is interesting as well. This horse wouldn't stand parallel with his 2 front feet. He'd always have 1 foot placed out in front of him. You can see how we've got this broken back hoof pastern axis. You can see how the heels have migrated up to about here. There's no sort of heel region here anymore. All this was broken up. And you can see the descending. Although sort of he hasn't changed his posture here, you can see he's not going to be comfortable at all here. So again, we didn't actually have great deals to trim off. We restored the geometric proportions that we spoke about, restored this hoof wall length, and then when we actually did our foot mapping, we were able to correlate all these things with the calipers and determine the center of rotation and shoe about that. Okay, so when we look at a standardized 6 to 8 week shoeing cycle, you can see why, well, me personally wouldn't advise it. You try and impose balance and symmetry and all these things on the feet at day 1. However, from that point onwards, it's continually growing away from normal, say at day 21, and by the time you've reached day 45 or more, you are grossly abnormal, so it's no longer going to be balanced. So the standard cycle, this standard 6 to 8 week that people seem to go for, cannot be applied across the board, and is certainly detrimental to the horses going. And that is due to all the factors that we've discussed: conformation, shoe selection, environment, season, disease, regime, and hoof imbalances. So balance, it's easier. So restoring foot balance by trimming alone is not always possible. Sometimes you have a foot with insufficient wall, sole, or heels, which means you cannot actually adjust those geometric proportions. So therefore, a shoe of a particular description or variant is then used. However, that's where the skill then comes into it, and you have this importance of the knowledge and understanding of not only functional anatomy of the horse, but also the biomechanical interrelationship of both the limb and the foot, so how these two react with each other, but also the limb, the foot, and actually the ground that it's working on. So we have to consider these specific circumstances and considerations of the overall horse after thorough individual assessment, and I'll sort of emphasize individual assessment. Can we then decide on the appropriate shoe? And it's one of the reasons why prescription shoes for specific pathologies is certainly not the most efficient method when you take it into consideration everything that we've just talked about, all those considerations of balance in all these different planes of reference, shall we say. So yeah, so that is that. I'm sure you've all got questions on balance, so ask away. But thank you very much. I hope it helped.
You talked about plastic deformation of
Yep.
the hoof and how you end up with that shape, which is just horrible looking hoof. Is that something that you can then allow to grow down with good trimming that will repair, or is that once it's...
Yes, yeah, well, the horn actually that is kind of reached the stage of that plastic deformation. It's going to have to, it cannot no longer return to its original form, so it will either be trimmed away or be eventually allowed to grow out and replace, and that's the beauty of, you know, it's continually growing fresh horn. And even in a case of laminitis, which this one was, I wish I had the original model when we first dealt with this horse around about 9 months ago. This entire area was resected away. Really wasn't pleasant, but you can see how we've got more or less a centimetre of growth now. So even though we've got this, you could say this was plastic deformation, this laminal wedge, this horn is providing no tensile strength whatsoever, no compressive strength. You can see how eventually that will grow out. Probably another 5 or 6 months we'll see a much better hoof, and as long as everything's balanced and level, we should get a nice fair bit of growth down here, which we are getting at the moment, so we're definitely heading in the right way with that one. But yeah, so yeah, the horse is well equipped to deal with those sort of situations. Yes?
Just thinking about parallels, and in like trimming the feet of cattle, you have like the Dutch 5-step method, which is sort of like a formulaic way of correcting foot imbalance. Is there an equivalent for horses, or is there too much variation in sort of the presentation you get?
So you say there's a 5 steps?
Yeah, so like you take the toe off, you take the sole so it's at the correct angle with the toe, and then you measure the length. Yeah, it's like a very prescriptive way of staging through the foot trimming process.
Right,
Are there sort of a similar sort of key principles that we can apply when we're talking to clients about what they should be looking for and how the farriers treating their horses' feet?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's generic to each individual horse, and that was one of the things I was trying to get across. There is no set way, and each horse, you know, some horses may go and they have tons of foot to actually deal with, other horses don't. But basically this foot mapping, taking into consideration the hoof past and axis, the medial lateral balance, all those different sort of balances, shall we say, that you need to take. Balance is not one thing, so it's accommodating for all them, and actually coming up with a plan or a trimming method where you can actually tick as many of them boxes as you possibly can. It may not be completely achievable, and hence why you then need may go down the lines of advising on a particular shoe. If you cannot achieve, say, your medial lateral balance and you need to go for a spiral shoe, shall we say, where you're thicker on one side than the other, to ultimately achieve level footfall, because that is what we're actually trying to achieve through balancing the feet, is to when the horse is actually working, it's landing level, and therefore the forces going up the leg are level, and all the soft tissue, the ligaments, everything is experiencing, or shall we say, under that load that it can actually sustain without reaching plastic deformation. So yes, so there's no
set
generic
formula,
sort of
but yeah.
do this, do that, do that. It's taking that all that into consideration before you actually do something about it.
Thanks.
With trimming to resolve foot abscesses, how long and how great an impact does that have on foot conformation?
Sorry, trimming to what, sorry?
Resolve foot abscesses, so if you take off quite a lot.
Foot abscesses, yeah. They can, they can be a problem if you have to sort of resect a large portion of the sole, but you'll be surprised at how quickly that'll sort of, shall we say, cornify straight away. Once the abscess is healed, I'd say a couple of days before you've actually hardened up, cornified that area. And I don't, if you have a level of sensitivity to it, with a pad, maybe for one shoeing cycle, at the end of that, I wouldn't be too worried about it anyway.
Are all changes necessarily pathological? Could some of them be just adaptations of the horse to that particular kind of work?
So, in regards to what sort of adaptations you think?
I don't know, like maybe plastic deformations, as you said, or just changes from what you would classify as the gold standard textbook balance.
I wouldn't be too sure.
I think could you have a case in a horse that's doing a particular type of work and it has a particular conformation or particular balance in its hoof, and then if you saw the same thing in another horse doing different work, you'd say, oh, that's abnormal, but it's...
Yeah, I see what you're trying to say. So it's normal for that horse to be doing that particular thing. I suppose we can relate that to race horses. We see a lot of race horses with this flat foot, long toe conformation, and we do say, we do experience a lot more sort of heel bruising than probably any other horse, maybe your warm bloods. So I suppose the different disciplines do have that sort of level of tolerance in regards to those particular problems, but the anatomy of the horse doesn't change, and I think the development of these pathologies is a direct link, whether it's doing one type of work or another. It's the relationship between the skeletal, the skeleton, the hoof, and the ground itself.
There are obviously quite a lot of supplements and topical things people put on their horses' hooves. Are there any that sort of bring up a red flag for you, and if someone says I'm using this particular supplement, you think I need to get them off that because it's actually not beneficial? Are there any we should really look out for?
The only thing I sort of tend to tell people not to use is hoof oils. I don't see any benefit to the actual hoof itself. I mentioned hoof conditioners earlier because it is actually water permeable, whereas oil isn't. And if you want to try and coat that hoof wall with it to allow the periople to work and to actually take that moisture up, then you need it to have a level of permeability which hoof oils don't. Some people like to use some sort of hoof hardeners when they think the horses got cracks in their feet, so they use a hoof hardener. And to me that makes it worse. If you think your hands when they really dry out and you get these cracks and splits, the last thing you want to do is harden them up even more. You want to actually provide a level of moisture to them. So yeah, I don't tend to advise on hoof hardeners or hoof oils. I highly recommend biotin supplements, things like that to actually improve horn quality. But yeah, not able to.
How do you assess hoof balance in young stock, and how early should you start intervening, and can you cause long-term problems?
We intervene as early as possible, and you're more than welcome to come down and have a look at these specimens. This is a 5-day-old foal. And if you just take a look at the heels on that, look at the balance on it, you can see straight away it's already out of balance. You know, we've got this long toe on there, you know, probably keeping them on box rest or even just a little bit of exercise, probably on nice pasture. You know, the feet aren't going to be able to manage themselves. As soon as we can get involved, we have a very short window in sort of the ossification stage, which I'm sure you're aware of. So, yeah, as soon as we can, the better, really, with young stock.
So I saw that like nutrition's listed as a contributing factor to a lot of aspects of like hoof health. And other than the classic kind of laminae changes that you see with diet, what other aspects of diet would kind of?
Probably need a nutritionist to answer that one, but we see it from horses that, and I think, you know, we see it as humans, you know, when you're sort of not out on the best diet, your skin's not the best, you know, your fingernails, they all sort of, they're an extremity to the body, so they're always the last one in regards to getting the full sort of nutrients from the body. So you do see that in a horse's feet, but yeah, I'd have to be a nutritionist to actually answer that, you know, in regards to how it actually helps.
I've heard a couple of vets say not particularly positive things about farriers, and I've heard a couple of farriers say not particularly positive things about vets before. Do you sometimes get frustrated or feel that vets can be a bit snobby and like there can be a bit of a tension when everyone really should be working together, or do you find that actually in your practice it's been pretty easy to work with vets when you have cases that intersect?
I'm actually very lucky because we work in Newmarket, we work with vets day in, day out. Yeah, there's definitely times when a vet would maybe recommend something and you probably wouldn't agree, and it goes back to what I was talking about, you know, there's so many different considerations which maybe farriers believe the vet haven't made before they actually come up with that prescriptive shoe that they think they've made, and they've thought of something else, and that's where the sort of clashes can often come from. And it's probably one of the reasons why I would, and I am doing, as I mentioned before, this degree course, but it's having that level of science, sort of science-based farriery to understand, to make that decision in selecting the shoe, you know, and I think it's a good thing for vets to actually sort of, I'm not too sure what you actually taught at school here, but to have that level of knowledge of how you actually make that decision for your shoe selection, rather than saying you've got laminitis, put on a hard bar shoe or something like that, that description, you know. There's so many other considerations that need to be made before you can actually do that, and that's one of the things I've tried to sort of highlight today.
What's the biggest thing that vets do that kind of pisses you off?
The biggest thing, this is being filmed here. Sometimes just not a lot. You know, the farrier specialises in the hoof, so one of the biggest gripes maybe would be, you know, allow the farrier to you know, if you've got an abscess, you know, some people really like to get stuck in, and vets like to get their knives out, the nice shiny knives, and have a go. But you know, on the flip side, you know, let the people who deal with it day in, day out often do, and that's the only question. It's not really a problem, but yeah, that's all we do. We have a very good relationship with all the vets that we work with, and it is because, you know, we try and explain what we're actually thinking, what processes we're going through, you know, understanding all this to actually come up with the shoe that we want to use, and the vets are very open to that as well. But yeah, it does happen. You hear stories of. I did a talk a couple of years ago on vet-farrier relationships, so yeah, it's definitely something there. Any more questions? Does anyone want to have a look at some of these specimens? Oh, I do just want to share one thing. I was building this leg as part of one of my suspensory ligament snap. I was building this leg. This is a leg when I was doing my apprenticeship, we used to keep dead legs in the freezer. We used to shoe them as good practice, nailing on and all them sort of things. Once I finished my apprenticeship, I thought, what am I going to do with these legs now? I certainly couldn't throw them in a wheelie bin, so I buried them. 2 years later, I had an idea of a YouTube video to dig them up and actually do something with them. So that's why, and these are the bones from that day. And I wanted to try and make a mechanically functioning leg. And although I didn't really highlight this in the talk, but I just want to show you that it actually does suspend its own weight. Although it's not, you know, a true representation of what's going on here, it certainly shows some level of how all these ligaments and tendons actually work, and we do have an ability to sort of function. Also highlights quite well the range of motion of the fetlock and the coffin joint, and how little the pastern joint moves. The two pastern bones just mainly act as a lever. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. I'm quite impressed with it. But yeah, you know, feel free to come and have a look at some of these things. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.